Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search builds great teams by connecting lawyers in Texas with career opportunities at small and boutique law firms. So if you're thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel here back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. Before we get started, I want to remind you, if you haven't had a chance to listen yet, that we did drop a new movie verdicts episode this last week. And so if you are at all interested, I encourage you to go check it out. Robert Callahan is back with me and we break down the Pelican Brief. And if it's been a while since you've seen that or you've never seen it, it is a early 90s John Grisham adaptation. He had a big run of legal thriller novels, continues to write them, but really had a big run in the 90s. And a lot of those became movies, including The Firm and A Time to Kill. We've done Runaway Jury. There's more out there for sure. And we'll probably get around to all of them at one time or another. But this, The Pelican Brief was an early 90s movie with Denzel Washington and Julia Roberts, kind of at the early stages of their ascension. And it's just a fun thriller, and we had fun with it on the show. And so I encourage you to check it out. It's in your feed right now. So go over and do that. Also, before we get going here, wanted to let you know about a few of the opportunities that we're currently searching for. So in Dallas, we've got a lot going on in Dallas right now. Multiple business and commercial litigation positions, one of which with more of a commercial bankruptcy focus. We also have a litigation and a corporate and M&A attorney position with a larger firm, mid-sized firm available. Those are in Austin. Those are in Dallas. In Austin, we've are continuing to search for both a family law attorney and a special education attorney. In Tarrant County, we're looking as well as for a family lawyer and a corporate and real estate attorney, and then in Houston, looking for a personal injury attorney. And so if any of those are of interest to you or maybe someone you know, please get in touch with me, Daniel at varsitysearch.com. All right, speaking of personal injury in Houston, that is where we are today, where our guest is Mary Green. And Mary recently joined the personal injury firm of Pierce Skrabanek after nearly 8 years as an associate and then partner at another Houston PI firm. Mary's practice focuses on medical malpractice and general personal injury law, and she's been a Texas Super Lawyers Rising Star each of the past 2 years. All right, with that, let's hop into our conversation with Mary Green on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Mary Green joins us right now. Mary, thanks so much for taking time to come on the show with us.
You bet. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, I'm excited to have you and very excited to see your Star Wars and Lego background behind you. For people that are listening to this, you can't see it. It's really awesome. And I think I was going to ask her to pan the camera to show me all the other Legos, but I don't know if we'll get to that. But
It would take too long. There's too many in the house.
But if I'll grab a video clip so people could see it, or at least a still shot so people put it up on social so people could see it. Okay, so Mary, start off by telling us about your practice, what you do, your firm, all that fun stuff.
Sure. So I'm with Pierce Skrabanek, and I've recently started at this position. My history is in medical malpractice law, and previously I was with a firm for 8 years that only did medical malpractice. And so I have brought over some med mal cases to Pierce Skrabanek, but also I'm excited about exploring other types of plaintiff's PI and other types of personal injury cases. So,
yeah, that's exciting. Tell us about what's the latest in what's going on within the med mal area, since that's been your primary focus for all this time. We hear a lot in the especially on the kind of news side, political side of kind of, and legal press too, about what's happening in med mal and in Texas and plaintiff side. So tell us about what the kind of the latest is. What are you thinking most about when it comes to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, the biggest changes in med mal have been in, tort reform measures have been in place for a while now, right, since 2003.
Right.
The more recent changes, or kind of potential changes, we're not quite sure how it's all going to pan out, are related to COVID. There was a bill that was just recently signed by Governor Abbott, I think last month. It might have been the month before, but it was Senate Bill 6 that relates to some immunity that hospitals and healthcare providers potentially can get related to treatment of COVID patients.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's not quite clear how that bill is going to affect just regular med mal. Cases like that I'm handling that we're not suing over people getting COVID, but they're in a hospital that's treating COVID patients. Does that impact these potential defenses? It's not quite clear, but that's kind of something it'll have to kind of pan out, since it's a retroactive statute. So that's going to impact all the cases, that I signed on last year. So that'll be a fun little legal puzzle.
For sure. Speaking of COVID, and we were talking offline just before we started recording about just getting used to practicing by Zoom basically for the last year. What has that experience been like for you? And what are you seeing now as we're starting to kind of come out of that hopefully phase and getting into a post-pandemic type of world? Are you seeing a transition in the way practice is happening and the way courts are handling things? What are you seeing right now? And for context, people listening later, it's June 30th when we're talking right now.
Right. Yeah. So I only do litigation. And so every single one of my cases were impacted by COVID. And really for all of, from March for the rest of 2020 last year, almost all the cases, we're at a standstill for a little while, for a month or two, while people were just kind of trying to figure out, well, how long is this going to last? What are we going to do? But slowly but surely, everybody, courts and, all the attorneys I work with had to kind of get on board, that this isn't going going away anytime soon. So we need to figure out how to do things remotely, by, video conferencing. And it actually, things progressed better than I thought they would. I was still able to work up cases, take depositions, attend hearings. I didn't have any Zoom trials. I know, a lot of my, friends and colleagues, for example, like who are in family law or criminal law, they can't just not do trials for a year. All of my trials, we just got continuances until 2021. So thankfully I didn't have to deal with that aspect.
Right.
But I mean, we're slowly but surely starting to transition out of that. I actually had an in-person trial earlier this month. Okay, and great. It was wild how normal it felt.
Yeah. Well,
so
that's
that was
great.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. What was we've had a couple of, plaintiffs folks on in the past, and I'm curious your experience and how how COVID over the last year impacted the motivation on either side of the case, parties to move towards a settlement. In some ways, not having a trial pending or looming can kind of take the urgency off, I imagine. And then others may just want to, hey, I don't want to wait for who knows how long we're going to have to wait to get this thing done. Should I just settle it? So how did that kind of play out for you and your work and your clients?
Yeah, no, exactly what you said. I saw both sides of it.
Okay.
For some of them, it was a case that we had mediation set and we were able to transition it to do a conference call and we're able to still get it settled, or do Zoom mediations and still have things go forward. But it was one extreme or the other for a while there, to where it's like, oh, well, we're getting a continuance on the trial date, so we have another year to kind of kick this down the road. But then a lot of other adjusters, I think, were like, we have enough problems. Like, let's just try to get things off our plate. And so that was a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've asked this before. How did you get into, or did you always know you wanted to do plaintiff side work? How did that come about? And talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I was always very interested since my first torts class, honestly, my first quarter at Baylor, in medical malpractice. Yeah. It just, for whatever reason, it really piqued my interest. And then I learned the bad news that nobody does this anymore. And it's just in Texas, this really isn't viable. Right. And so
then you switch to workers' comp. No, just
yeah, no, exactly.
Everything else that's been statute out. Yeah.
Right. And so thankfully I was able to talk to some professors at Baylor about it and get some connections and put in touch with a plaintiff's firm that only did med mal, which is very, very rare in Texas, even though we do handle some cases in other states, been pro-hawked into those other states. Yeah. But I mean, when I was, after I passed the bar, I applied for some defense firms, general insurance. I just wanted, those student loan bills were coming due soon. And so, my heart was always kind of in plaintiff's work, but I wasn't gonna, I was kind of lucky, honestly, that I was paired, with a firm that did the type of law that I was interested in. And that's why I stuck with that firm.
That's awesome.
That whole time.
That's great. Yeah. When I talk with candidates, lawyers that are thinking about making lateral moves, it's interesting. I was just having this conversation literally this morning with someone where, and I don't know if it's just sort of the season that we're in or just it's a coincidence or whatever, but I've been talking with a decent number of folks that are on the defense side who are wanting to make the jump over to the plaintiff side. And so I'm curious from your standpoint, obviously you've been on the plaintiff side the whole time. So some of this is you don't have that familiarity, but I think you'd be a good person to ask about this. Like, what do you think from someone who's on the defense side thinking about making that transition over the plaintiff side? What are some things they need to be thinking about? One, from a standpoint of, is this really what you want to do? Or do you think it's just what you want to do? And then secondly, like, what are the things that they need to either emphasize or get up to speed on or adapt to make that successful transition?
Sure. I think having work on the defense side, at least under the personal injury umbrella, which is really all I've ever done, having that perspective from the defense side can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And I would see that as a plus, if I was looking to hire a new candidate, whether it's on the lateral side or on an associate level too.
Yeah.
Just because, especially if it was more of a lateral position, they really understand the process and what's going through, on the other side of things. So then that they can better educate not only the clients on the plaintiff side, but also be able to understand how they can move a case forward in ways that, for example, like, communication with an adjuster and having to deal with an adjuster. That's something that, even though I've never done defense work, I often will ask the defense lawyers, I'm like, hey, what is your adjuster like? I'm not just going to send a demand out of the blue. What will help things towards a resolution? And so having the perspective of how things work on the other side, because they've done it, I think is very helpful.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, there's a lot more planning and pushing on the plaintiff side. And I think that would be, if I were coming from the defense side, that was something that might be hard. You can't be reactionary.
Right.
In other words, at a plaintiff's firm, you have to be pushing and planning forward. You can't just kind of wait around for something to happen. So that might be more challenging, but not something that's impossible to learn by any means.
What about one of the reasons that I hear quite a bit from people that are thinking about doing something like that is, the idea of I got to get away from the billable hour and get is that. Yep. Talk about that a little bit, because I feel like sometimes while that's true in maybe technical terms, I'm not sure it's actually true in the way things play out necessarily the way they might think. So talk about what that's like in terms of your time, your work, your hours, and all of that, and how someone transitioning from a defense firm, would maybe walk into a situation like that.
Sure. So never having done defense work, thankfully I've never had to deal with the dreaded billables
Yeah.
that I hear about on the other side. So I mean, I think that it's kind of a change in mindset, because it's not like, oh, have I met my billables for the week and then I'm done?
Right.
It's like, okay, what needs to be done on this case to move it forward or to move it through whatever stage we're in? And so it's just kind of more about changing your perspective, I would think, as opposed to kind of checking a box. Okay, well, this is all the client will pay for, and so that's all the work I can do on it. It's like, well, no, actually, more work or maybe less work is necessary.
Right.
Depending on what the issue is.
Right.
So I feel like that can be, you have a little bit more flexibility, but that also requires more organization and forethought on your part when you're on the plaintiff side.
That makes sense. Yeah, no, thanks for that. Okay. So as you think back and look back at your first maybe year or two in practice, what's something that you learned then that is an important part still today of how you practice?
The first thing that comes to mind is organization. I don't know. That's my personality. And it really has served me well.
Sure.
I just, when I started out, I had, I worked directly with a partner and I had, 30 cases I was working on. It was a very small amount. And that felt so overwhelming. But then I continued to add to that as I got experience. But that staying organized aspect always, is kind of my secret to my success in a lot of ways. Just finding a way to stay organized that works for you, which I know that not everybody has that flexibility because a lot of firms have a set, whether it's needles or another program to be able to organize things. But for example, like I have Evernote that it helps me stay organized with my different cases. And so it's kind of, am I making, notes in two places? Yes, but it works for me. And so kind of figuring out that it's not about just being able to remember all of it. It's finding a system that works practically for you to be able to stay on top of your to-dos and your planning on all that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Is that something that you've always kind of had that in you? You said it sounded like it was kind of part of just your personality and stuff like that. Or is that something you had to either learn later, or you've seen people do things certain ways and thought that's good for me, I'm going to try to emulate that?
It's a little bit of both, but I'm definitely the type A personality stereotype. And so that helped with, I always have been very organized, taken a lot of notes because I can't remember it all. And so just having a lot of documentation, not only for other members of my team, but for me to remember, I think it helps a lot. But finding as far as working on a team, whether it's, when I have associate attorneys or paralegal or just staff you're working with, it's not just about you staying organized. It's also about making sure that it's a system that other people can stay on top of. And that's, I had to learn a little bit more of to make sure that it was a way that I was communicating with my staff in a way that was productive. And that's not, that didn't necessarily come as easily to me. That was more of a learned behavior, but that also depends on, the personality types, of the folks that you're working with too.
Sure. Yeah. What's the best piece of advice you received as a young lawyer, maybe from a partner or a mentor or something like that you have hung on to or that's been important for you?
Yeah, there's one, actually the first partner that I worked with, some advice that they gave me that was very helpful, which sounds kind of trite at first, but I mean, the piece of advice was like, find a way that works for you and then do that. In other words, it's not one size fits all. So yes, there's, you need to know the law and you need to follow the law. But as far as,
45 days doesn't work for me. I think I'm going to do 90 days instead. Does that work?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, setting that aside, right. But it's like, the goal is to, from a plaintiff's personal injury standpoint, at least, the goal is to obtain a client recovery.
Right.
Because we're working on contingency fee, so we're not going to get a recovery. Yeah. Our expenses aren't going to come back and our client's not going to get anything. And so the end goal generally is either get a recovery through a settlement outside of court or through a jury trial. Yeah. But his advice to me, though, that partner that I mentioned, was that, this is how I do it. But that's not how you have to do it. As long as you're, obviously following the law and understand the law, the end goal, and you're reaching the same end goal, but it's not that it's a one size fits all. Yeah. And that's really stuck with me because it really isn't. It depends on so many different factors, having to do with the client's personality, the issues in the case, opposing counsel, but just to have like a rigid one size fits all doesn't work for this. And so, that really has always stuck with me. And I've passed that on to other associates about like, hey, this is my process, but it doesn't have to be yours as long as this is the end goal that we're on the same page about. Yeah.
No, that's really, really good. When you think about some of the associates that you've either worked with or that you've led over the years, what's something that a young associate has done or can do to stand out to you in a positive way?
So my teaching style or my training style is not going to be the case for everybody, but mine is I explain a lot of things. I take the extra time to say the how and why of why I do something. Or I'm not doing it this way just because I want to. There's a reason for it. There's a method to the madness, in other words. And I've had some associates who have really listened to that and internalized that, and then I can see that. And I think that makes them better at their job. And so obviously listen, but if you're, from an associate's perspective, if whether it's a partner or a higher level associate or whoever you're working with, if they're not explaining the how and why, ask, because that, I think, sets you apart, because you're not just doing a task because you've been told to do it and check it off your to-do list. You're wanting to look deeper and to understand the process.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a better associate, but I think it also, at least in my mind, associates that have taken that initiative and shown that curiosity are the ones that typically do better, because they are more interested and understand it better.
Yeah. And it's funny because I actually think that maybe not for everybody, but I think for a decent amount of people, that advice almost sounds counterintuitive in some ways, because I think sometimes people will think, hey, I get an assignment. The thing I need to do is don't ask any questions, go and get it done as quickly and as, efficiently as I can, and bring it back. And that will show that I did exactly what I was told and I got it right back to them and all that. And so to hear you talk about it like that, it's like that, but taking that extra time to ask some follow-up questions to get the how and the why, and then, is maybe not what they would think first. So, and do you feel like that's something that is partner dependent, or is something that they just need to kind of figure out, or is more universal? Kind of, I want to make sure that they're hearing, because I think you're right, 100%. I think like that's generally speaking right. And so, but I want to make sure people listening aren't confused or just like questioning. Okay, wait. I'm not just supposed to go kind of do what I'm told, and that doesn't show that I'm wanting to do what I'm told, kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think context is always important for this type of situation.
Sure.
And I would say it is partner specific too. You have to have that rapport, and you also have to make sure that you're asking the types of questions when it's a good time, because sometimes there's a deadline and there's not enough time to ask about it. And it is just, this needs to get done, and you can show your worth and set yourself apart by getting something done timely and well. But I think when the time and place allows for it, to be able to say, hey, I noticed we did it this way. Is there any particular reason for that? Or I noticed we consulted with this type of expert. Is that because of XYZ? Or could you explain that more to me?
Yeah.
Picking, when there's a deadline for an MSJ to get filed by 5 p.m. and you're coming in at 4:45, that's not the best time, right, obviously, to talk
right
about that. But they're picking the right time and place and the right subject for that with someone that will recognize that initiative and also take the time to explain it to you, I think can be helpful, not only for the associate's personal growth, but also setting them aside apart from others to say, oh, well, they really seem to be getting it. They're asking questions that show that they're not just mindlessly doing things, they're thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think sometimes they think, by asking questions, somehow I'm showing that I don't know as much as I should, or that I haven't learned something yet that I should have already learned. And I think that, again, context matters and specifics matter, but in most cases, I feel like that lawyers that take the time to ask additional questions and learn more about the process and learn more about why they're doing something, that's rarely frowned upon, and rarely is someone thought less of because they're asking questions like that. Even though it may feel like it, because you're maybe feeling vulnerable, like you're asking something maybe you should know the answer to. Is this a dumb question? That kind of thing. But it goes back to, all the way back to your school days. Like, you're always encouraged to ask questions. Like, there's a chance that you're going to sound stupid when you say it, but it's just, you got to get past that, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think it also is a good chance to show what you've already done to try to figure out the answer, to where it's not like you have to start at square one. You can say, we designated this expert. I went in, looked at their CV and looked at, so I saw that they had this background. Is that why we decided to go with them? Or what other, that's just kind of an example that comes to mind, but It's not that you have to start at square one and say, I don't know anything about this, explain it. There is a time and place for that sometimes, but that's another way to make yourself stand out, as an associate, especially, is to say, well, I already looked into this A, B, and C. What are the next steps and why?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. How about on the flip side? What's something that either is maybe pet peeve is not the right word or phrase, but something that bothers you or something that you try to, counsel out of your associates if you see them doing something?
Yeah. I feel like I've had some associates that when I do take the time and to explain the how and why, who aren't listening to that or who don't really pay attention to that. And that bothers me because then I feel like I've wasted my time. Sure. It's like, I'm not explaining this to you to hear myself talk. I'm doing it for your own benefit so you can be better at your job. And so if you're not appreciating that, that shows me that they're not really invested or interested in it. And if they're not, that's fine. They just might not be a good fit for the firm.
Right. Right.
So, that's a little bit more specific to how I interact with my associates, right. But more generally, I don't know. I've had some associates that have take the whole like fake it till you make it kind of truism, but take that to an extreme to where they're like, I know everything. And I'm like, no, you don't. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah.
So to have that confidence is important, but that can sometimes be a little bit too extreme to where you're like, you don't know. And that's okay.
Yeah. So it goes to what we were saying earlier about asking questions. And so, yeah, definitely. So I realize that it is likely a little bit different in the plaintiff's world than in most other practice areas. But when we talk about the idea of lawyers starting to build their own either book of business or their own client list or relationships that could lead to business in their legal practice, what are some of your thoughts there on things that young lawyers especially should be thinking about? They're still probably trying to become good lawyers first and foremost at this point. But as they start thinking about, building those relationships that could lead to business, what are some of the things that you think are important?
Yeah, no, building your book of business, I know less about that just because that's not, on the plaintiff side, I don't have repeat clients or anything like that.
Hopefully. Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But I think that maintaining, a connection with other people in the field, whether they specialize in your same area or just, people that are alums or with friends of yours that have a background that they would need a lawyer like yourself or, keeping those connections with people, I think is really, really helpful because you never know what could come from that. Because so much in the legal business is a word of mouth recommendation.
Right.
I have, I feel like a lot of people that, are sent to me by other lawyers say, I was working on this person's divorce. And then they said, hey, I also had this issue with, a doctor, or my cousin had this. Do you do that type of law? Do you know someone that does that type of law? And
right.
So if you are in an area where you have a niche market, being able to get the word out to colleagues, friends, other people in, whether it's on a business side or they're also in the legal market, being kind of that go-to person as, I do know somebody that does, maritime cases or medical malpractice. Let me put you in touch with them. Just kind of having that connection is good, especially on the plaintiff side. If you have an agreement with your employer to, get a referral fee,
Sure.
a certain percentage of the attorney's fees, not only is that great for you, but then that you're demonstrating value to the firm you're working for, that you can bring in business on your own. And then that makes you a more valuable asset for them.
Yeah. And I'm glad you kind of differentiated between kind of building the book and then building the referral base, because I do think that while the book maybe, is not applicable to you and applicable more to other areas, but the referral base, I think, is applicable to almost every lawyer in the sense that we all do different things and we all can recommend people for the things that we don't do. And so, for people to know who you are and what you do, and have trust and faith that they can send someone to you and that it won't come back on them later is important, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, you can do that in so many different ways. It can be the traditional kind of networking that people think of. That's not my favorite thing to do. I kind of have to make myself do that just because that's not always, my talking to a group of people that I don't really know is not always my favorite thing to do.
Right.
But there's a lot of other ways to do that too. I mean, like, for example, there's I don't really do anything on Facebook anymore, but there's a Facebook group of Baylor alumni lawyers to where they're from all different walks of life. And they'll say, hey, I used it recently to where I had a client that was like, hey, I need a probate lawyer just to draft up a basic will. And I was able to go to that and got recommendations for a couple people. It was very quick.
Yep.
And then, and so, I mean, to have something like that, whether it's online, whether it's in person, whether it's through your school or any other, way that you can connect with other people based on your specific locale or your common interests, that's a potential way to be able to foster that kind of development. So,
no, that's great. Okay, so when you are in the process of hiring an associate, what are maybe one or two key things that you're looking to see on a resume before deciding, hey, this is someone we would want to talk to or bring in an interview?
I think it's really important to tailor your resume to the specific job you're applying to. Mm-hmm. Because then that shows me, this associate this person isn't just sending out their resume to 100 different law firms and just wants a job anywhere.
Yeah.
They've taken the time and thought about, okay, well, what from my background, I've never done medical malpractice, but I got a lot of trial experience when I was at the district attorney. Let me put that first and let me highlight what types of skills I would need at this new job that I have developed at the old job.
Yeah.
Because especially for younger associates, they don't have as much experience and the hiring individuals understand that, but to be able to highlight, even if it was on a basis before law school or like on a volunteer basis, to be able to outline things like good communication skills, knowing how to manage and organize a lot of information or people, things like that, to be able to highlight, this is the job that I'm applying for, but this is how I cultivated some of those skills in previous positions. That helps a candidate stand out. And then, of course, I mean, if they have experience in that field previously, that always makes them stand out. But you don't always have that, and that's okay. But to tailor it to catch the eye of someone reviewing a resume. Can be really important.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've actually been talking to several folks recently, and we've been going through this process, especially for people that have had, maybe some type of either by multiple jobs doing different things, or maybe in their current job, they do some transactional work, some litigation, maybe some litigation or some like administrative law or whatever. And that, if you just kind of have one resume that kind of highlights all of those experiences, and then you go to a plaintiff's firm and say, I want to come do this, it's hard for the employer to be able to dissect that and figure out, okay, is this really what they want to do, or how does this translate? And so we've been going through the process of, if you apply to a litigation firm, let's highlight those litigation experiences, highlight those skills. It's not that we necessarily have to cut everything you've ever done transactionally, but we certainly want to, take it to maybe to the bottom of the stack of the list of experiences, and not maybe include all the transactional stuff that you've done, because it's going to be confusing. Exactly. Right. I mean, people want to know this is where you want to be and this is what you want to do, and you don't want to kind of mess with the messaging there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, I think that can be a process that's helpful too for an applicant. I know sometimes you just have to, a job is a job, and sometimes that's what you need. You can't hold out for that dream job. But at the same time, if you're trying to tweak your resume and you're finding it difficult to be able to put together experience or something similar for the job you're applying for, to kind of take a pause and be like, well, is this a position I really do want to apply to? Yeah. Can be helpful for them.
For sure. And then when you, so if they get past that initial stage and you bring them in for an interview, what are a couple of things that you look for in the interview, positively or negatively, to decide whether or not to move forward with them?
Sure. So there are kind of two things that come to mind. The first is, I think about how would this person interact with clients, with opposing counsel, or with a judge, based on how they're talking to me. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of something that it's not as much substantively what we're talking about, but just kind of like how would this person, because those are the scenarios where they're going to be in. And so and that's hard to kind of prepare for, but that's kind of the biggest thing that's in my mind is, this person only got an interview in person because they were qualified or they seemed promising, well, how are they, how would they interact on a professional level,
right.
In these other situations? That's really important. But another aspect is that I don't think gets talked about enough in these kind of scenarios is, do I want to work with this person? Like, I'm going to see this person every day for at least 8 hours.
Yeah.
Like, are they a personality and that would fit with the other people that work there? If I'm hiring someone to work directly with, do they have just the kind of demeanor that would work well with mine? And again, that's kind of impossible to prepare for in an interview because you don't know yet. But interviewees, I didn't really appreciate this when I was initially applying for jobs because I just needed any job. And so I was a little bit more desperate. I was, I wasn't going to hold out for the dream job necessarily. But you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And so you have to think about that too as an interviewee. Are these people that I'm going to be spending a lot of time with these people? Are these people that I'm going to want to spend this time with and that are going to help me with, my professional growth? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that personality or that culture isn't a good fit for you, and that's okay. I think that's true on both sides of the person that I'm interviewing and the person that is interviewing.
Yeah, I that's super well said. I mean, I think sometimes people, because they're, once they get into the mode of I am going in and interviewing for this job, like, I think sometimes we get into the mindset of, okay, so a success here is getting an offer. And it's understandable. And of course, if it's a place that as you learn more, you do want to get an offer, you want to work there. That's true. But at the same time, like you're saying, you're interviewing them as much as they are you. The success is really learning as much as you can about the opportunity, the people, and figuring out whether it's a good fit, and communicating to them your interest, your personality, your the way that you work in an authentic way that's true, that's not kind of made up just for the interview, so that everyone can have all the information and make good decisions about whether to move forward or not. And hopefully that's into an offer and an acceptance, but maybe the best result is that you don't,
definitely.
Right. So, but that can be hard because I think for most of us, like we would rather get the offer and then turn it down than not get the offer. So like,
for sure,
just for our own self-esteem, I know I would totally cop to that. Like that would be more my mode for sure. But that can play into it too, because I think sometimes, obviously at the beginning of the firm is the one that has the kind of first leverage of making the offer. And, so kind of more in the position of the power arrangement there until the offer gets made. And then, so you can kind of think through strategically how to, broadcast your interviewing of the firm at different stages of the process, and for sure can do more of that once you have an offer in hand and can make sure if it's the right thing for you.
Definitely gives you a better negotiating position for sure. Yeah,
definitely. But I think too, the last piece on this that I wanted to ask you about, because I think sometimes when we talk about this like fit thing and is this someone that we want to work with and all of that, I know this isn't what you're saying, but I know sometimes I read this, I see this and hear this from people does that just mean the firm is just looking for homogenous, like everybody thinks the same, does the same things, hangs out together and best friends, like all that, and I don't think in most cases that's what, people mean when they say they're looking for the right fit. So talk a little about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I mean, if you can get along well with your coworkers, like that's obviously, at least for me, that helps with my own mental health and makes things smoother. But it's, you're interviewing for a job. You're not interviewing for a group of new best friends, and that's okay. Yeah. But it's just, and honestly, I don't know that I would want to work for a place or with a group of people where it all is just homogenous and everybody kind of thinks the same. I don't think that's helpful. But more so, I don't know, just kind of knowing what you're getting into, because how people interact and how people work with one another varies so much firm to firm. And again, I've always worked in a small firm setting. And so that is kind of unique. I know that a lot of the bigger, not just big law, but larger law firms, what are the group that I'm working with? What's the people that are going to be more immediate? How do they relate with one another? Yeah. Does that work well for my personality and how I work? It's important to think about.
For sure. No, absolutely. All right, so we're near the end of our time here, and so I'm going to ask you if there's anything we haven't talked about yet, or anything you'd like to end on to leave with our lawyers before we get to our rapid fire questions to finish out the time here. So, anything that we haven't either talked about yet, or maybe you'd want to leave with them, or something we want to go deeper in before we finish up.
One thing that had come to mind, and this is really true for on the plaintiff side of things. I don't know, is to remember the human side of it.
Yeah,
that's something that I didn't really think about until I was actually practicing.
Mm-hmm.
So the types of clients that I'm dealing with on the plaintiff side, like I said, they're not repeat clients. They're going through something that is probably one of the worst things they'll ever deal with.
Yeah,
personally or within their family.
Yeah.
And so to understand that people grieve in different ways. And obviously you're not their therapist, but to kind of understand where people are coming from and how they're processing that, I think is something that they don't teach in law school.
Yeah.
And that is really important and can make you a better lawyer and a better advocate to be able to relate to your clients, but then also instill that trust with your clients that you know what you're doing, and when push comes to shove, and you're giving them advice that you think they should take, they're more willing to trust you, but you're also willing to give them better advice because you've understood that process better.
Yeah, I that's always a great reminder. And sometimes I think we try to categorize that into, folks that are working in plaintiff's work or in family law or in criminal defense. And certainly it's super personal and emotional in those settings. But look, if you're doing business litigation, it's a small business owner and it's their business on the line. It's the same thing. It can
right.
kind of extend out beyond, I think, the areas that we typically think of when we talk about that level of kind of counseling and emotional pieces and things like that. So I think that's great to always keep that in mind that, with some exceptions, maybe that most people that are having to deal with lawyers and especially in a litigation setting are not doing it out of the joy of their heart. And so
exactly.
probably, not enjoying every moment of it the way we might be if we're all geared up, ready to fight in trial or whatever we're ready to do. So that's great to leave on for sure. All right. Our rapid fire questions. Are you ready? One word, one phrase, and we'll knock these out.
All right. Ready as I'll ever be.
All right. Name one trait or characteristic that you most want to see in an associate.
Hardworking.
Yeah, for sure. What habit has been key to your success?
Organization.
Oh yeah, I said that earlier.
Like we
That's
talked
right.
about.
Your favorite? We already did this too. Your favorite app or productivity tool?
Yep, I already dropped Evernote.
Evernote's
I'm
there.
Not sponsored,
No.
but I'm going to mention them again. They're great.
These seeped into your subconscious as you were talking through the other part. All right. What would you list first in the interest section of your resume?
Like me personally, or
yeah, if you're
general?
writing up your resume, you're sending it out, you got an interest section. What are you putting first?
I'm putting travel first.
Travel. Awesome.
It's a good conversation starter.
There you go. Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, your favorite legal movie.
I got to go classic, To Kill a Mockingbird, or My Cousin Vinny, maybe. Those are very different movies, but that's kind of a tie.
Both excellent. Yes, very different. And that's great. In fact, we've done both of those on the podcast in our deep dives with Robert Callahan and myself. To Kill a Mockingbird is the most recent one we did. We did My Cousin Vinny at the very beginning. So we've hit both of them because they're both excellent legal movies. So good picks for sure. All right, Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show with us. I appreciate it and wish you and your firm, your new firm, all the best.
All right. Thanks very much. I enjoyed getting to chat with you.
All right, my thanks again to Mary Green for joining us on the show today. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider doing two things for me? Would you subscribe so you don't miss an episode? And would you rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen? And if you have suggestions or thoughts about the show, or if I could help you in any way, including with connecting you to any of the opportunities that I mentioned at the top of the show, please email me, daniel@varsitysearch.com. Also, don't forget to check out our movie verdicts episode on the Pelican Brief. It's a lot of fun, and I am confident that you will enjoy it. All right, that's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we'll talk with you next time.